The sky over Norfolk, Virginia, was the color of wet steel that morning. Low clouds pressed down on the waterfront city, and a thin curtain of mist clung to the streets near the federal courthouse. The old stone building, with its columns and brass-framed glass doors, loomed above the sidewalk like a silent sentinel. By 8:30 a.m., a handful of local reporters stood shivering on the courthouse steps, hands wrapped around paper coffee cups. They weren't here for anything high profile, just the usual morning docket. A few drug possession cases, some minor fraud charges, and the occasional probation violation. Nothing that screamed headlines. Not yet. Inside, the marble-floored lobby echoed with the clack of dress shoes and the rustle of papers. Security officers in dark uniforms manned the metal detectors, greeting familiar attorneys and courthouse staff with curt nods. The air carried the faint scent of coffee from the kiosk in the corner. No one noticed the woman at first. She stood in the corner of the lobby, apart from the clusters of attorneys and nervous defendants. Her posture was upright, her movements economical. She wore a dark navy blazer over a plain charcoal gray blouse, matched with neatly pressed slacks. Her hair, silver at the temples but still thick, was pulled back in a no-nonsense bun. She carried no purse, only a small folder tucked under her left arm. She didn't fidget, didn't scroll through a phone, just waited. When the security officer at the magnetometer gestured for her to step forward, she moved without hesitation. She placed her folder on the conveyor belt and passed through the scanner. The guard barely glanced at the X-ray screen before sliding the folder back to her. "Courtroom 3B?" he asked, reading the small visitor pass clipped to her lapel. She gave a single nod. "Yes, sir." The "sir" caught his ear. Not many defendants use that word anymore, at least not with that tone, respectful, but somehow even. Courtroom 3B was on the third floor, at the far end of a narrow hallway lined with portraits of past judges. Most people hurried past them without a second look. She didn't. Her eyes moved over each frame with an almost imperceptible focus, scanning names and dates like she was memorizing them. Halfway down the hall, a young bailiff leaned against the wall, scrolling on his phone. He straightened when he saw her. "You here for the Miller case?" he asked. "No," she said simply. He checked his clipboard. "Defendant in 3B?" "Yes." He frowned. There was no file photo for her, just a name. And even that had a notation. Identification restricted. The clerk had muttered something about a sealed background check, but nobody had bothered to explain. The room smelled faintly of polished oak and old carpet. On the far wall, the American flag hung beside the state flag. The judge's bench rose above the well of the court, flanked by heavy burgundy curtains. A handful of spectators sat scattered on the benches. Most were here for unrelated hearings, and barely glanced up when she entered. Those who did saw nothing remarkable, just another defendant. At the defense table sat a weary-looking public defender, his tie slightly askew. He looked up, blinked, and leaned toward her as she took the seat beside him. "Ms. Grayson?" he asked. She didn't confirm or deny, just folded her hands on the table. The judge's clerk stepped up to the bench and whispered to Judge Meredith Cole, a no-nonsense jurist known for her impatience with games in her courtroom. Cole glanced toward the defense table, her sharp eyes narrowing slightly before she adjusted her glasses and returned to the file in front of her. "All rise," the bailiff announced. The judge entered, robes flowing, and everyone stood. After she took her seat, the room settled again. "This is the matter of United States versus Ms. Grayson," Judge Cole began, her tone cool. "For the record, state your full name." The woman's gaze remained steady. "Respectfully, Your Honor, I am unable to provide that information in open court." A ripple moved through the room. The court reporter's fingers hesitated over her stenotype keys. The prosecutor, a young assistant U.S. attorney with a tendency to overcompensate, arched an eyebrow. "Is that so?" Judge Cole's voice carried a warning edge. "Ms. Grayson, this court requires a full name for the record." "My authorization does not allow me to disclose that," the woman replied, calm as still water. The prosecutor rose from his seat. "Your Honor, the government moves to compel the defendant to identify herself. We have reason to believe she may be withholding information relevant to ongoing investigations." The public defender sighed. "Judge, my client has indicated she's under some sort of federal non-disclosure obligation. I've requested clarification from the U.S. Attorney's Office, but haven't received an answer." Cole's gaze flicked between them. "Non-disclosure or not, in this courtroom—" "Your Honor," the woman interrupted, her tone respectful but firm, "the nature of my work, past and present, is classified under federal statute. Disclosure in this setting would violate that statute." The gallery stirred again. Classified? In a minor procedural hearing? The very idea sounded absurd. Judge Cole leaned back in her chair. "Ms. Grayson, until I have a concrete reason to deviate from standard procedure, you will either identify yourself or be held in contempt." The bailiff stepped toward the defense table. "Ma'am, you need to comply." Her eyes met his, not defiant, not pleading, measured. "I cannot." "Then you'll have to come with me." She didn't resist as the bailiff touched her elbow, but her posture remained straight, every step toward the side door precise, controlled. It was the walk of someone used to moving under watchful eyes. As they passed the first row of benches, a man in a worn army cap leaned toward another spectator. "That gait," he murmured. "Seen it before. You don't forget it." The other man shrugged. "She's probably ex-military. Lots of vets walk like that." But the first man shook his head. "Not just a vet, that's something else." Meanwhile, in the hallway outside, 2 U.S. Marshals were already moving toward 3B. One of them carried a sealed envelope, the kind usually reserved for high-security interagency communications. The envelope bore no markings except a single word stamped in red: restricted. Inside, Judge Cole tapped her pen against the bench. Something about the woman's composure. It wasn't arrogance. It was familiarity with pressure. Cole had seen hardened felons sweat under far less scrutiny. This woman? Not a flicker. She nodded to the bailiff. "Hold her here until I've spoken with the marshals." The bailiff returned with the woman and guided her back to the defense table. She sat, hands folded again, as if nothing had happened. The courtroom door opened briefly to admit the marshals. One approached the bench, leaning in to speak quietly to the judge. Her eyes scanned the first page of the document he handed her, and her expression shifted, just slightly. The prosecutor cleared his throat. "Your Honor, is there an issue?" Cole didn't answer immediately. She set the document aside, face unreadable. "Let's proceed with the arraignment." Before the prosecutor could launch into the charges, a new sound cut through the low murmur of the courtroom, the distant rhythmic echo of footsteps in the main hallway. Heavy, deliberate, unhurried, the kind of footsteps that carried authority. Heads in the gallery turned toward the door. The echo of those boots drew closer, louder, until the massive oak double doors at the back of courtroom 3B swung inward. For a moment, the fluorescent light from the hallway framed the silhouette, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark navy service dress uniform, immaculate enough to have been cut from glass. 4 gold stripes glimmered on each sleeve cuff, and his chest bore a neat row of ribbons. His cover was tucked under his arm, his jaw set with the kind of sternness you didn't see in courtroom theatrics. This was discipline forged over decades. The bailiff straightened unconsciously. The clerk stopped typing. Even Judge Cole's hand froze mid-gesture. The Admiral's gaze swept the room once before locking on Ms. Grayson. It wasn't the look of a man spotting a stranger. It was recognition, immediate and unshakable. He strode down the aisle between the spectator benches. No hurry, but not a wasted step. As he drew closer, whispers in the gallery swelled like a low tide. "Is that Yeah, that's Admiral Rourke. What's he doing here? The prosecutor's confident posture deflated, replaced by uncertainty. The public defender glanced between his client and the Admiral as if trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. Rourke stopped beside the defense table, looking first to Judge Cole. Your Honor, his voice carried easily in the still room. With your permission, I need to address the court on behalf of this woman. Cole blinked. And you are? Admiral Thomas Rourke, United States Navy, retired. ID and credentials are with the marshals. The marshal in the corner gave a subtle nod, already verified. Proceed, Cole said, though her tone carried more curiosity than command. Rourke's gaze shifted to the prosecutor. Counselor, I understand you're moving to compel my former colleague to disclose her identity. She's not a colleague of mine, the prosecutor muttered, but the Admiral ignored it. Ms. Grayson, he said, deliberately using the alias, has served this country in capacities neither you, nor this court, nor most of the Department of Defense are cleared to know about. If she's here, it's not because she's hiding, it's because she's honoring a promise. The gallery's murmur rose again. Cole rapped her gavel. Order. Rourke placed his cover on the defense table, then turned toward her. It's your call, Commander, he said quietly, words meant for her alone. We can shut this down, or we can let them keep asking questions they're not ready for. The title hung in the air, Commander, like a dropped glass that hadn't yet shattered. The public defender's eyes widened. He'd prepared for a petty charge hearing, not a revelation that his client held, or had held, senior Navy rank. Your Honor, Rourke continued, in 2009, during an operation off the Horn of Africa, this woman made decisions that saved the lives of... He stopped, recalibrated. Classified number of American personnel. The official record is buried under Joint Task Force archives. It's not public, and it's not meant to be. Cole studied the Admiral. And you're telling me her identity is protected? I'm telling you it's more than that. It's safeguarded. The prosecutor tried to recover his footing. With all due respect, Admiral, this is a court of law. She's facing charges. What charges? Rourke's voice cut clean through his words. The young attorney hesitated. Failure to comply with a federal subpoena. Because the subpoena demanded she violate a classified non-disclosure order, Rourke countered. The marshals exchanged glances. This was well above their pay grade. Grayson's face remained unreadable, but behind her eyes, 1,000 moments flickered. Steel corridors of a Navy ship, the slam of watertight doors, the sharp salt air of an ocean under blackout conditions, the voice of a young ensign she'd pulled from the water, the coded orders she'd delivered without hesitation. She wasn't here for herself. She was here because someone had asked her to be, knowing full well the risk. Cole exhaled slowly. Admiral, if what you're saying is true, then this proceeding is compromised. It is, Rourke said simply, and the longer it continues, the greater the risk to national security. The prosecutor looked as if he wanted to argue, but the words died on his tongue. Even he could sense the currents shifting. Rourke looked back at Grayson, a silent question in his eyes. Are we done here? She gave a barely perceptible nod. Then, for the first time since she'd entered the courthouse, Grayson rose of her own accord. The room seemed to lean in as she straightened to full height, not defiant, but resolute. Cole leaned forward. Given the circumstances, and the representations made on record by Admiral Rourke, I am dismissing this case in the interest of national security. This court is adjourned. The gavel fell. The sound was final. The bailiff stepped back, no longer guiding her. Rourke gathered his cover and motioned toward the aisle. The two of them walked side by side toward the open doors. Every eye followed them. No one spoke. Only once they reached the hallway did Rourke speak. You didn't have to let it get that far. Her reply was calm. Sometimes they have to see the edges of the truth before they believe it exists. He allowed himself the faintest smile. Still the same as ever. They disappeared into the elevator, the doors closing with a soft chime. In the now empty courtroom, the prosecutor stood frozen, his notes useless in his hands. Judge Cole lingered on the bench, eyes distant. Somewhere deep down, she knew she'd just brushed against something vast and untouchable. And in the gallery, the man with the worn army cap leaned back, murmuring to no one in particular. I knew it. Fade to black.